Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into some really fascinating ideas from Erydir.
That's right. We're looking at their work on harmonic phase convergence.
Yeah, and we've been reading Erydir's book, which is, well, it's quite an attempt to connect physics, mathematics, and maybe some less conventional ways of thinking about the universe.
It really is. Their main focus seems to be on scalar fields, and specifically what these fields might tell us about consciousness, about reality itself.
Okay, so definitely ambitious. Erydir's trying to bridge, that gap between really analytical science and maybe a more intuitive grasp of things. So our goal today for you listening is to try and unpack some of their core concepts. We'll be digging into scalar fields, harmonic oscillations, this idea of resonance.
Harmonic phase convergence, they call it HPC, and something called the scalar breath cycle.
Exactly. And we'll touch on what Erydir thinks the implications might be for consciousness, evolution, memory, maybe even a unified theory of everything.
But we'll try to do it without getting totally lost in the super technical weeds.
Yeah, let's aim for clarity. So where should we begin this exploration? Scalar fields seems like the place to start, right?
Definitely the logical starting point. Erydir really emphasizes how scalar fields are different from vector fields. Vector fields have magnitude and direction like wind velocity.
Right.
But a scalar field is simpler. It's just defined by a single numerical value at each point in space and time.
Okay, just a number, like temperature in a room. Every spot has a temperature value, but the temperature itself doesn't point anywhere.
That's a perfect analogy Erydir uses. Just a number.
Okay, a number at every point. And Erydir gives some key examples to make this clear.
Yeah, they do. One big one is gravitational potential. You usually think of gravity as a force, right, pulling things. But fundamentally, it can be described by this scalar field. The closer you get to a massive object, the higher the value of this potential energy field at that point.
Gotcha. So it's an underlying value map.
Exactly. And another really crucial example Erydir talks about is the Higgs field. This is, absolutely vital in particle physics.
That's the one that gives particles mass, isn't it?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's this scalar field that just exists everywhere in space-time. And how different particles interact with it determines how massive they become. The discovery of the Higgs boson was the big confirmation.
Right, the particle associated with the field. And they also mention electrostatic potential.
Yep, around an electric charge. Again, it's a scalar field. A single number at each point telling you the potential energy, basically the work needed to bring another charge there.
Okay. So what's the main takeaway here? Why are these examples important for Erydir's argument?
Well, what's really striking, and Erydir points this out, is just how fundamental and widespread these scalar fields are in physics. They're not some, obscure side topic.
They're central.
Right. Gravity, mass, electromagnetism, scalar fields are involved. And Erydir suggests this ubiquity means they probably play a really core role in the universe's structure and dynamics, maybe in ways we haven't fully appreciated beyond these standard examples.
Okay, so we've got these fields, just values everywhere, seemingly static. But that's not the whole picture, according to Erydir, is it? This leads us to harmonic oscillations.
Exactly. Erydir argues that beneath this apparently static surface, there's actually a lot of dynamic, oscillatory behavior going on. And understanding that is crucial for getting to HPC.
So things are vibrating, essentially.
In a way, yes. They start with a simple harmonic oscillator model. Imagine that scalar value at one point isn't fixed, but it's fluctuating rhythmically over time, like a smooth wave going up and down.
Okay, like a perfectly regular weight bouncing on a spring, that kind of oscillation.
That's a good way to picture it. And mathematically, you can describe this with its amplitude, how big the swing is, its angular frequency, how fast it's swinging, and a phase constant, which is sort of its starting position in the cycle.
And crucially, these scalar fields have their own preferred rhythm.
Yes. Each scalar field has what's called a natural frequency, determined by its own intrinsic properties. Think of it like its inherent vibrational rate.
Okay, got it. So it has its own beat. Now, where does resonance come in? That usually means things getting louder or bigger, amplified.
Exactly that. Resonance happens when some external influence pushes on the scalar field at a frequency that matches or is very close to the field's own natural frequency.
Ah, like pushing someone on a swing. If you push at just the right rhythm, matching the swing's natural frequency.
They go higher and higher. That's precisely the idea. The amplitude of the scalar field's oscillations gets significantly amplified.
Right. And Erydir uses that analogy of a guitar string, right? It starts vibrating if another string nearby is plucked at just the right pitch.
Yes, sympathetic vibration. So in scalar fields, Erydir proposes that resonance can lead to these amplified energy fluctuations. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because this amplification can apparently lead to the formation of geometric patterns, things like spirals, toroids, donut shapes. And these patterns often seem to reflect recursive scaling, like Fibonacci-like ratios.
Wow, Fibonacci showing up already. So resonance isn't just amplification, it's structure forming.
That's the suggestion. And this hints at some kind of deep underlying order. It's also where Erydir introduces this concept they call the scalar breadth cycle.
Ah, yes. What's that?
It's described as these rhythmic expansions, which are like the amplified oscillations from resonance and contractions, where the energy kind of dissipates within the scalar fields. They suggest this cycle might be a fundamental pattern you see mirrored in lots of natural phenomena.
A kind of cosmic inhale and exhale built from these oscillations. And the timing, the phase relationship between different oscillations matters too.
Hugely important. Erydir explains that oscillations that are in phase, meaning their peaks and troughs line up, add together constructively. They reinforce each other.
And if they're out of phase?
They can cancel each other out, partially or completely. This interplay dictates the spatial patterns that emerge.
Okay. And there's a mathematical tool for figuring this out.
Yeah, Fourier analysis. It's a way to decompose any complex waveform, no matter how messy, into its underlying simple sinusoidal components. It lets you see the frequency spectrum, the amplitudes, and crucially, the phases of all the contributing waves.
So you can break down the complex vibration into its individual notes, so to speak?
Exactly. And Erydir suggests that resonance within this bigger picture of HPC might create these localized regions of heightened activity in the scalar field. These spots could potentially be the basis for what they call scalar memory, or even conscious awareness.
That's a big claim. Scalar memory and consciousness arising from resonance.
It's definitely one of the more profound implications they explore. They even propose that things like symbols or sound or even our focused intention might subtly tune these natural frequencies, leading to selective amplification of certain oscillations.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack already. So from these basic oscillations in resonance, we build up to the main event. Harmonic Phase Convergence, HPC. What exactly is this, according to Erydir?
HPC, as Erydir describes it, is essentially the constructive interference of multiple harmonic oscillations within a scalar field. So think not just one or two waves interacting, but many, many waves, each with its own frequency, amplitude, and phase that's starting point.
Right.
When these multiple oscillations interfere constructively, meaning their peaks align reinforcing each other, troughs align reinforcing each other, they combine to form stable, often geometric structures.
Like those spirals and toroids we mentioned before, generated by lots of waves adding up just right.
Precisely. And mathematically, Erydir shows this is a superposition, basically adding up all those individual oscillations. Fourier analysis becomes even more critical here to figure out the frequency mix and, crucially, the phase relationships within the overall complex pattern.
So phase, the timing or alignment, is absolutely paramount.
It's everything. If the oscillations are in phase, their amplitudes add up, you get amplification, you get structure. If they're out of phase, they can cancel out. It's this intricate dance of phases that determines the specific geometric patterns that emerge.
Erydir gives that simple example, right? Two waves, same frequency. If they start together, in phase, they double up. If one starts at its peak when the other is at its trough, 180 degrees out of phase, they cancel completely.
Exactly. Now imagine that with potentially thousands or millions of different oscillations converging. The resulting geometric forms often reflect those Fibonacci-like ratios and also complex rotations in 3D space. Erydir mentions quaternionic rotations here.
Quaternions. That's advanced math for handling 3D rotations, isn't it?
Yes, it's a way to describe how something rotates around multiple axes simultaneously in 3 dimensions in a very precise mathematical way.
Okay, and Erydir uses an analogy for HPC.
Yeah, the interference patterns of waterways. You drop pebbles in a pond, the ripples spread out, and where they meet, you get these stable patterns of higher peaks and deeper troughs. HPC is like that, but with scalar field oscillations creating regions of concentrated energy through constructive interference.
And complex numbers in these quaternions are the tools needed to really describe these oscillations and rotations in 2D and 3D, reflecting the frequencies and phases.
That's right, they provide the mathematical language. It sounds incredibly intricate, and it is.
So what's the significance of these energy hotspots created by HPC?
Well, this is where Erydir connects it to, well, almost everything. They propose that these concentrated energy regions could be fundamental to a huge range of phenomena. On the cosmic scale, maybe the formation of stars and galaxies,
Wow.
down to the scale of, say, the workings of neural networks in our brains, and perhaps even the phenomenon of consciousness itself.
So HPC could be the underlying mechanism creating structure and complexity at vastly different scales.
That's the core idea. This concept of harmonic frequencies converging in phase really suggests a deep interconnectedness between physics, math, and maybe even metaphysics. The potential applications, if Erydir is right, are vast.
Okay, so these geometric structures that keep popping up spirals, Toroid's Erydir explicitly links them to mathematical order, specifically Fibonacci ratios and those quaternionic rotations. Let's recap Fibonacci quickly for listeners.
Sure, it's that sequence, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, where each number is the sum of the two before it.
Right, and the ratio between consecutive numbers gets closer and closer to the golden ratio, phi, which is about 1.618. And this ratio appears all over nature.
It does, surprisingly often. And Erydir's explanation is that phase convergence itself can actually generate Fibonacci-like sequences. How? Through the superposition, the adding up of oscillations whose frequencies are related by these Fibonacci ratios.
So if you have waves with frequencies in, say, a 3.5 ratio or 5.8, their interaction through HPC can naturally lead to patterns like the golden spiral.
That's the proposal. The golden spiral is that one where the curve widens by the golden ratio factor every quarter turn. Imagine the amplitude peaks of these interacting waves aligning in just that proportion due to their frequency relationships.
That's pretty mind-blowing. And then the quaternions come in to handle the 3D aspect.
Right. Quaternions are like a more sophisticated version of complex numbers, perfect for describing those complex, multi-axial rotations in 3 dimensions that Erydir sees in these HPC structures. The phases of the contributing oscillations dictate the orientation and evolution of these rotating forms.
So it's this interplay Fibonacci ratios governing the scale and proportion, and quaternionic rotations defining the 3D form and orientation. And this often leads to complex, fractal-like structures, patterns repeating at different scales.
Exactly. Fractal geometry seems to emerge naturally from these principles. Now, Erydir is careful to note it's not always a perfect match to the pure mathematical Fibonacci sequence in the messy real world, because you always have other factors, perturbations.
It's real-world noise.
But the prevalence of these kinds of ratios and rotational symmetries strongly suggests, to Erydir at least, an underlying mathematical principle organizing complex phenomena.
And they give examples beyond spirals.
Oh yeah. Phyllotaxis, the arrangement of leaves on a plant stem, often following the golden angle derived from Fibonacci. The arrangement of florets in a sunflower head, typically involving pairs of Fibonacci numbers. These natural patterns hint at principles of efficiency, maybe optimal packing or growth, that are somehow encoded in these harmonic relationships.
It's like nature is performing complex math to optimize itself, and Erydir thinks this applies even more broadly.
They suggest it could. Things like the spiral arms of galaxies, the branching patterns of rivers or trees, even potentially the dynamics of complex systems like neural networks or financial markets might exhibit signatures of these underlying principles.
It really points towards a fundamental mathematical language organizing the universe, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests a kind of unity. And Erydir emphasizes that HPC, especially modeled with modern computing power, is a key tool for potentially unraveling these mysteries. They see future research relying heavily on sophisticated computational models to explore these intricate relationships further.
Okay, we've built up this picture of scalar fields, oscillations, resonance, HPC creating structures with mathematical order. Stepping back, what are the really big picture implications Erydir draws from this for how we understand reality itself?
Well, it's pretty profound. Erydir basically proposes that the physical universe, at its most fundamental level, isn't primarily made of tiny particles bumping around, but is rather this dynamic interplay of interacting scalar fields.
So reality is woven from these fields.
Yes, constantly oscillating, interfering, converging according to these harmonic principles, and that process creates the fabric of reality that we perceive. Erydir uses the metaphor of the universe as a cosmic symphony, with all the patterns and structures we see arising from this underlying harmonic structure.
That's a beautiful image. It shifts the focus from localized interactions to a more holistic, interconnected view, doesn't it?
It really does. Take galaxy formation, for instance. The standard model involves gravity, dark matter, initial density fluctuations. Erydir suggests that maybe it's also, or even primarily, a manifestation of harmonic phase convergence among vast cosmic scalar fields.
So the spiral structures we see in galaxies aren't just gravity and rotation, but might be visible patterns of phase convergence in these fields.
That's the idea. Similarly, in biology, Erydir proposes that the intricate structures of organisms, how they grow and develop their form, morphogenesis, might be guided by dynamic scalar fields acting as morphogenetic gradients.
And the Fibonacci ratios we see in biology might emerge as naturally optimized solutions within these guiding fields.
Exactly. Optimize ways for these harmonic interactions to play out.
This is such a grand vision. How on earth could we even begin to test something like this?
It's definitely challenging. Erydir suggests a few approaches. One is meticulously analyzing the mathematical relationships found in natural structures, looking for that precise Fibonacci-like or quaternionic order predicted by HPC.
Okay, pattern hunting with advanced math.
Right. Another approach is examining the dynamic properties of complex systems, like the firing patterns in neural networks, or fluctuations in financial markets, to see if their behavior is consistent with the predictions of HPC models. It requires innovative experimental designs and very sophisticated data analysis techniques.
But the potential payoff is huge, right? A unified perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Potentially a novel, more unified way to look at an incredibly diverse range of phenomena, suggesting a deep fundamental connection between mathematics and the tangible reality we experience. Erydir stresses that ongoing research is crucial for refining our understanding of how these scalar fields might interact.
Okay, we've talked about the structures formed by HPC. But then Erydir introduces another layer of dynamism, the scalar breath cycle. What's the core idea here? It sounds cyclical.
It is. The scalar breath cycle adds a temporal dimension, a rhythm, to the HPC picture. It describes a regular expansion and contraction within these interacting scalar fields. Think of it like a pulsating heartbeat of reality underlying the patterns.
So the structures aren't static, they're breathing, in a sense, expanding and contracting rhythmically.
That's the image, yeah. A cosmic inhale and exhale, perhaps. Erydir even provides a simplified mathematical representation using coupled differential equations, potentially involving nonlinear terms, to illustrate how energy density within these fields might cycle periodically, increasing during expansion, decreasing during contraction.
And this isn't just abstract math. Erydir connects it to rhythms we see everywhere.
Very much so. Analogies are drawn to breathing, obviously, but also the beating of a heart, the rhythmic flow of energy and information. The key idea Erydir pushes is that cyclical processes might be fundamental drivers in the universe, not just stable states or simple transitions between them.
So this cycle could be a framework for understanding. Well, what?
A huge range. Erydir suggests it could apply to cosmological cycles, maybe the expansion and contraction of the universe itself. On smaller scale, biological rhythms, circadian rhythms, cellular cycles, maybe even things like climate cycles or economic booms and busts.
Wow, that's incredibly broad, from the universe to the economy. But modeling that kind of dynamic, cyclical behavior, especially its nonlinear, sounds incredibly complex.
It is. Erydir is clear that this requires detailed mathematical modeling, likely heavy use of numerical simulations on high-performance computers. It also means engaging with concepts from non-equilibrium thermodynamics, which deals with systems where energy is constantly flowing and changing.
So it's pushing the boundaries of complexity science.
Absolutely. It opens up new research avenues for analyzing these kinds of nonlinear systems and looking for subtle cyclical variations in data that we might have previously dismissed as noise. It's presented as a potential pathway towards a more holistic understanding of the universe's dynamic evolution.
Okay, let's zoom back out to the cosmos. What are the specific cosmological implications of this scalar breath cycle? How does it stack up against, say, the standard Big Bang model?
Erydir proposes it as a potential alternative or maybe complementary view. Instead of a single Big Bang followed by continuous expansion, perhaps with an early inflationary phase, you'd have this ongoing rhythmic expansion and contraction.
So the universe might eventually contract again and then re-expand, a cyclical universe.
That's the implication. In this model, the Hubble constant, which measures the current expansion rate, wouldn't be constant over cosmic time. It would actually be a time-dependent variable, oscillating with the breath cycle.
So the accelerating expansion we currently observe might just be one phase within this larger cosmic cycle. Maybe we're in the middle of an outbreath.
Precisely. It could be a phase where expanding scalar fields are currently dominant, and things like dark matter and dark energy, these huge mysteries in cosmology.
Yeah.
Erydir suggests they might influence the dynamics of the scalar fields, modulating the expansion and contraction phases. Even the large-scale structure of the universe, the web-like distribution of galaxies, could be related to inhomogeneities in the scalar field energy density during different phases of the cycle.
And the ultimate fate. Not heat death or infinite expansion, but potentially endless cycles.
Potentially. Though Erydir notes that due to the complex, likely nonlinear dynamics, each cycle might not be an exact replica of the last. It could be a continually evolving cycle. But again, this is deep theoretical territory. Developing a rigorous mathematical framework and comparing predictions with detailed astronomical observations, cosmic microwave background, galaxy surveys, supernova data is a massive undertaking.
Okay, let's bring it back down to Earth, or rather, into our bodies. How might this scalar breath cycle manifest biologically? You mentioned rhythms earlier.
Absolutely. Erydir sees the pervasive rhythmicity of life as a potential reflection of this underlying cosmic cycle. Our own respiratory cycle, inhalation as expansion or energy inflow, exhalation as contraction or outflow, seems like a direct parallel. The pressure gradients involved might even mimic scalar field dynamics.
And the heart.
The cardiovascular system, too. The heartbeat is this constant rhythmic pulsation. Contraction ejects blood, relaxation allows refilling. It's governed by electrical signals, which Erydir might see as analogous to the interplay of scalar fields orchestrating the rhythm.
Even down to the cellular level.
Potentially, yes. Cell division is fundamentally rhythmic. Erydir speculates that the growth and DNA replication phase could be like expansion, and the actual division into two cells like contraction, perhaps regulated by mechanisms analogous to the forces driving the cosmic cycle.
Metabolic pathways, too, like the Krebs cycle.
Many metabolic pathways operate cyclically, reflecting this constant flow and transformation of energy. And of course, circadian rhythms, our internal 24-hour clocks driven by oscillating gene expression, fit perfectly into this picture of nested hierarchical rhythms. Erydir even links it back to morphogenesis, the idea that the development of an organism's form is guided by these interacting scalar fields.
So it's like biological systems are inherently tuned to or emergent from these fundamental cosmic rhythms.
That's the fascinating proposition. The hierarchical organization we see in biological rhythms, from cells to whole organisms, might mirror the interconnectedness of the cosmos itself. But, as Erydir stresses, this requires a huge amount of multidisciplinary research integrating these ideas with existing biological knowledge, developing ways to detect the proposed subtle energy fluctuations. It offers a potential unifying principle connecting life and the universe.
Okay, now, for arguably the most profound and perhaps most speculative leap, consciousness, Erydir proposes that consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex brains, but a scalar phase event within the scalar breath cycle. What does that even mean?
It's definitely a radical idea, and Erydir presents it as such. The suggestion is that consciousness isn't solely located in the brain, but arises as a temporary moment of heightened convergence, a special kind of coherence among the oscillations within the scalar field.
So the brain isn't the generator, but maybe more like a receiver or a tuner.
Exactly. The brain acts as a crucial receiver and modulator. But consciousness itself, in this view, isn't confined to the neural tissue. It's a phase event in the wider field.
And phase here relates back to the phase of the oscillations.
Yes, think about phase and wave mechanics. It leads to coherence and energy density. Erydir seems to be suggesting consciousness is like a phase transition in the scalar field, a temporary shift to a state of much higher coherence facilitated by the brain.
So our neural activity, the synchronized firing of neurons, the brain waves we measure like alpha, beta, gamma, these could be the brain tuning itself, creating the right conditions for this coherence event in the scalar field.
That's the interpretation offered. Different brainwave states might correspond to different levels or types of coherence with the scalar field. Erydir even touches on things like near-death experiences, NDEs.
How do they fit in?
Well, the speculation is that perhaps in NDEs there's a state of heightened scalar field coherence that allows consciousness to temporarily transcend the physical limitations of the body, maybe aligning more directly with the universal field.
And meditative states.
Meditative states, often associated with specific changes in brainwave patterns like increased alpha or theta waves, could be seen as practices that intentionally modulate the scalar field via the brain, promoting coherence and leading to subjective experiences of oneness or expanded awareness.
Even brainwave entrainment, where external rhythmic sounds or lights can influence brainwaves that could support this idea of the brain interacting with external frequencies?
It could be interpreted that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Supporting a link between brain activity and the modulation of or tuning into these fields. But Erydir is upfront about the massive challenge. Directly measuring these scalar fields and their interaction with biology is currently beyond our capabilities.
So it remains a theoretical framework for now.
Very much so. It's about reinterpreting neuroscience findings within this novel context. It calls for developing much more advanced neuroimaging techniques and more sophisticated models of scalar fields. Erydir even brings in ideas from quantum biology, maybe quantum entanglement or superposition, play a role in how our individual consciousness interacts with these broader fields.
The implications are huge, though. It challenges a purely materialistic view, suggests deep interconnectedness, maybe offers a new angle on the mind-body problem.
Absolutely. It's highly speculative, as Erydir acknowledges, but it provides a fascinating alternative framework that really demands a multidisciplinary approach to investigate further.
If consciousness is tied to this scalar breath cycle, what might that imply for biological evolution? Could this cosmic rhythm have shaped how life developed?
Erydir proposes that it might have, that the evolution of life wasn't just driven by natural selection acting on random mutations, but that the underlying rhythmicity of the scalar breath cycle could have influenced the emergence and development of all the rhythmic biological processes we see.
Like providing a kind of template or driving force?
Perhaps. Maybe the pulsations themselves acted as a catalyst for self-organization in the primordial soup, helping complex molecules arrange themselves in the very first steps towards life.
What about major evolutionary steps, like multicellularity or nervous systems?
Erydir speculates that scalar field oscillations might have played a role in facilitating communication and synchronization between cells in early multicellular organisms. And the development of nervous systems, with their complex rhythmic activity brainwaves, could be seen as a direct manifestation of organisms tuning into and utilizing these underlying scalar field oscillations, driving increasing complexity over evolutionary time.
And the emergence of consciousness itself, linked to both the scalar pulsations and complex enough nervous systems.
Yes, creating the necessary conditions for that phase transition into conscious awareness. Erydir even suggests that environmental factors, themselves potentially influenced by the broader scalar breath cycle, could have acted as a kind of macrocosmic regulator shaping the overall trajectory of evolution.
It extends beyond biology, too, maybe influencing culture, language.
That's pushing it even further, but the implication is there. It's a highly speculative, but potentially unifying perspective. Erydir is clear that direct evidence is lacking, but argues it warrants exploration through interdisciplinary collaboration between physics, biology, anthropology, and more.
Okay, shifting from the grand sweep of evolution to individual experience, Erydir introduces this fascinating, almost mystical idea of scalar memory. What is that?
The core idea is that the scalar field isn't just passive. It acts as a dynamic repository, actively storing imprints of all experiences, individual and collective, as enduring harmonic patterns within the field itself.
Like the universe has a memory bank built into its fundamental fabric.
Kind of, yeah. Erydir uses analogies like the ripples spreading on a pond. They seem to fade, but the information is still there in the subtle disturbances. Or like information stored in magnetic domains on a hard drive, or in the structure of a crystal lattice.
So every event, maybe every thought, leaves a permanent trace, a unique harmonic signature in this field.
That's the concept. Erydir speculates about the encoding mechanisms, maybe modulation of the amplitude or phase of these scalar ripples, or the formation of more stable, coherent structures, like little memory units within the field.
Does this connect to other physics concepts?
Erydir points out a resonance with the holographic principle. The idea that all information in a volume of space might be encoded on its boundary. Here, the scalar field would be the medium holding that holographic information.
So the past isn't truly gone. It persists as information in the field, potentially accessible.
That's the mind-bending implication. Erydir imagines that maybe, someday, we could develop detectors sensitive enough to probe these imprints. Imagine reading the history of the universe, or of life, directly from the field.
That would rewrite everything. But the implications? Understanding collective consciousness, maybe ethical questions about accountability?
Profound implications, absolutely. It requires a convergence of physics, information theory, neuroscience, maybe even fields like parapsychology to investigate.
How does our own brain activity, our personal memories fit into this? Are we constantly writing to this universal hard drive?
Erydir hypothesizes exactly that. Our neural activity, thoughts, perceptions, emotions, isn't just internal. It actively modulates the local scalar field, leaving measurable imprints, encoding unique signatures of our experiences.
How might that interaction work?
They suggest a couple of theoretical possibilities. Maybe the electromagnetic fields generated by our firing neurons interact directly with the scalar field. Or perhaps there's a deeper quantum connection, like entanglement between neuronal processes and the scalar field, allowing for almost instantaneous information transfer.
So our brains aren't just retrieving locally stored data, they might be interacting with this global field when we remember things. Could this relate to how memories are formed and strengthened?
It could offer a new perspective on synaptic plasticity, yes. Maybe the scalar field acts as a global organizing principle, guiding how connections between neurons are strengthened or weakened based on experience. Erydir even speculates about influencing memory externally by manipulating scalar field's potential therapeutic uses, but also risks.
And it might explain phenomena that are hard to fit into standard neuroscience. NDEs again, or out-of-body experiences.
It provides a framework where those experiences might make sense, if consciousness can indeed interact with or exist within this broader field independent of the physical brain. Erydir even touches on AI. Could future AI tap into this scalar field information?
Wow, the ethical implications are staggering too. Privacy, manipulation.
Absolutely. Erydir flags the profound ethical questions. If our thoughts imprint on a field, what does privacy mean? Could memories be manipulated? Rigorous guidelines would be essential. It requires a multidisciplinary approach involving neuroscientists, physicists, ethicists, and computational modelers.
If individual experiences leave imprints, what about the sum total? Does this lead to a collective scalar memory?
Exactly. Erydir proposes that the cumulative experiences of all sentient beings throughout history are imprinted in the scalar field, creating this vast, interconnected repository, a kind of collective unconscious made tangible in the field.
That's a huge paradigm shift. Instead of separate minds, we're all contributing to and potentially influenced by this shared memory field.
That's the implication. It could offer a new way to understand things like the transmission of cultural knowledge, or why certain myths and archetypes appear independently across vastly different cultures.
Like the universal flood myths or the hero's journey archetype, they might be resonant patterns emerging from this collective scalar memory.
That's the intriguing suggestion Erydir makes. Perhaps these are emergent properties of this shared field, patterns that resonate with human consciousness everywhere. Of course, the huge challenge is developing verifiable methods to actually access and interpret this supposed collective memory.
It sounds almost impossible, like trying to read the subtle vibrations of the entire planet's history. How could scientists even begin to investigate this experimentally?
Erydir acknowledges it's a massive challenge needing highly innovative approaches. First, you'd need incredibly sensitive detectors, capable of measuring potential subtle variations in scalar fields. Maybe advanced quantum sensors, atomic interferometers, things like Scooch-Squee eddies, all shielded meticulously from environmental noise.
Okay, so detector technology is key. What else?
Correlation studies are mentioned, trying to see if measurable scalar field changes correlate with specific shared experiences in groups, though the ethical hurdles there are immense. Indirect approaches could involve studying brain activity, using advanced neuroimaging during tasks related to memory recall or accessing shared cultural knowledge, looking for unusual patterns.
What about more fringe phenomena? Shared dreams, synchronicity?
Erydir suggests these could potentially be manifestations, but rightly on extreme methodological rigor to rule out coincidence or conventional explanations. Really, progress likely requires integrating multiple approaches, maybe measuring scalar fields and brain activity simultaneously during specific conditions. Computational analysis of large datasets of cross-cultural myths and symbols might also reveal recurring patterns hinting at an underlying influence.
It really feels like it overlaps with research into the fundamental physics of consciousness itself.
Completely. And Erydir emphasizes the ethical implications again, especially regarding any potential to manipulate collective consciousness if this field could be influenced. Interdisciplinary collaboration is absolutely essential.
This idea of accessing a universal memory bank is mind-boggling. But the ethical side, Erydir seems very aware of the dangers. What are the main concerns around accessing or even manipulating scalar memory?
They are profound, mainly because the information is potentially collective and deeply personal, maybe even subconscious. The most obvious risk is privacy violation on a scale we can barely imagine accessing not just conscious thoughts, but the lifetime imprints of individuals and groups.
And beyond just reading memories, the potential for manipulation, altering collective beliefs or emotions.
That's the truly alarming prospect Erydir raises. Imagine targeted manipulation of collective memories or beliefs for political or economic control, or reinforcing social inequalities by giving powerful groups control over the narrative of the past, or even inducing collective emotions.
How could you even get informed consent for accessing potentially subconscious collective information?
It becomes incredibly problematic, doesn't it? Erydir highlights this. There's also the impact on cultural evolution, the risk of historical revisionism on a fundamental level, or eroding the authenticity of diverse cultural experiences. How might it affect religious or spiritual beliefs? Could accessing traumatic collective memories have widespread psychological consequences?
It demands extreme caution.
Absolutely. Erydir stresses the urgent need for robust ethical frameworks developed through international cooperation, clear lines of responsibility, and maybe even new legal concepts. It requires a concerted effort involving physicists, neuroscientists, ethicists, social scientists, policymakers, everyone.
Okay, shifting gears slightly from the passive recording aspect to active interaction. Erydir discusses how symbols might influence these scalar fields. Not just abstract meaning, but actual physical influence.
Exactly. The proposition is that symbols aren't just static representations for our minds. They might be dynamic modulators of scalar field activity. Their geometry, their form, could actually affect phase convergence and the flow of information within the field.
And this connects to practices we see in spiritual traditions, sacred geometry, mandalas.
Erydir makes that connection explicitly. Think about mandalas used in meditation. The idea is that the specific geometric patterns and symmetries aren't just visually pleasing. They might be creating resonant effects within the scalar field, helping to induce altered states of consciousness.
So the pattern itself has an energetic effect.
That's the hypothesis. The geometry might create coherent energy states locally in the field. Erydir extends this to sacred architecture pyramids. Stonehenge speculating that their intentional geometric designs and alignments might have been partly intended as large-scale resonators, designed to influence the scalar field, maybe even collective consciousness.
It's like symbols act as keys unlocking information or states through resonance.
That's a good way to put it. Erydir suggests the shape, proportions, maybe even color, contribute to a symbol's unique frequency or resonant signature. The meaning we ascribe might be linked to these underlying energetic properties.
So a circle representing wholeness might interact differently with the scalar field than a cross representing duality.
Potentially, yes. The archetypal meaning might stem from or be reflected in its scalar field interaction. Erydir even notes the material of the symbol could play a role. It blurs the line between physical form and subtle energy.
The implications are fascinating for communication, cultural transmission, maybe even therapy using symbols consciously, but the potential for misuse is there too.
Always. If symbols can influence the field, they could potentially be used for manipulation or control. Erydir emphasizes the need for ethical consideration and further research, perhaps, trying to measure the energetic effects of symbols, requiring collaboration between physicists, artists, anthropologists, and spiritual practitioners.
Moving from the visual realm of symbols to the auditory. Erydir also proposes that sound and frequency can actively shape scalar fields. Again, going beyond just the air vibrations we hear.
Yes, the idea is that sound, as a form of vibratory energy, interacts with these subtle fields through resonance, much like symbols might through their form. Erydir points to the ancient and widespread use of sound in spiritual and healing practices, chanting, specific instruments like singing bowls or gongs.
So sound healing, for example, might be working by specific frequencies resonating with an individual's scalar field, restoring coherence or balance.
That's the theory Erydir puts forward. Different frequencies, low bass tones versus high pitches, and the complex harmonic structures within sounds, the overtones, could induce different resonant effects in the field.
What about chanting or group singing?
Erydir highlights the potential power there. The repetitive nature, the specific frequencies chosen, the communal aspect amplifying the field, and crucially, the focused intention of the participants could all combine to create a significant impact on the scalar field.
And cymatics, those patterns sound creates in sound.
Right. Erydir mentions cymatics, where you can literally see sound creating geometric patterns, often resembling sacred geometry. This visual link strongly suggests for Erydir a deep connection between sound, geometry, and the underlying organizing principles potentially related to scalar fields.
Again, huge potential for therapeutics, maybe consciousness enhancement, but the ethical concerns about manipulation, maybe using sound subliminally, remain.
Paramount, yes. Erydir consistently stresses the need to address ethical concerns alongside exploring the potential. It requires rigorous research to measure these effects and an interdisciplinary approach to understand the full picture.
We've covered symbols and sound as external influences. What about the internal influence of our own minds? Erydir discusses intentionality guiding scalar field interaction.
Yes, this is perhaps the most direct form of interaction proposed. Intention here means focused, sustained will or desire directed towards a specific outcome. The core idea is that our conscious mental energy can actively direct energy and shape information within the scalar field.
So things like focused prayer or detailed visualization might not just be psychological exercises, but could actually be influencing reality via this field.
That's the proposition. Erydir speculates that the electromagnetic fields generated by our brains, which become more coherent and powerful during states of deep focus, meditation, prayer, or intense visualization, could directly interact with and imprint upon the scalar field.
Visualization acting like a directed signal.
Potentially, yes. And prayer, often involving strong belief and emotion alongside focused intention, could be a particularly potent way to modulate the field. Erydir emphasizes that the coherence of the intention seems crucial. Mental clarity, emotional balance, lack of internal conflict.
The role of belief or expectation seems important too, like the placebo effect.
Erydir connects it, suggesting belief might amplify the effect of intention on the scalar field. Investigating this scientifically is incredibly difficult, of course. It would require measuring subtle energy shifts correlated with focused intention, maybe studying individuals known for exceptional abilities in healing or manifestation, all while navigating complex ethical waters.
If we can influence scalar fields through these means symbols, sound, intention, are there practical applications Erydir points to? Maybe things people are already doing?
Well, Erydir suggests that practices like sound healing, various forms of meditation, especially those involving focused intention or visualization, and energy work modalities like Reiki or Qigong might be examples of intuitively working with these principles.
What factors might make these practices more or less effective, according to this model?
Erydir highlights several. The practitioner's own state of mind, their coherence and clarity, the consistency and focus of their intention, their level of belief or expectation, and perhaps the recipient's openness or receptiveness.
But it still sounds like an area needing much more rigorous study and maybe better tools.
Definitely. Erydir calls for more research, perhaps aided by technological advancements in biofeedback to help people achieve coherent states, or more sensitive detectors for subtle energy fields. And crucially, the need for proper training, ethical guidelines, and perhaps certification for practitioners working in these areas.
And the ethical challenges of intentionally trying to influence scalar fields seem particularly thorny, maybe even more so than accessing memory.
They are significant, yes, because now you're talking about potentially influencing someone else's state, their thoughts, emotions, even physical health, directly through this field. Informed consent becomes absolutely critical in any practitioner-recipient relationship.
But the potential for misuse beyond that, for manipulation on a larger scale.
That's the major concern Erydir raises repeatedly. Influencing groups, social control, weaponization, if such influence is possible, the risks are enormous. Given our incomplete scientific understanding, Erydir advocates for a strong precautionary principle. The importance of training, certification, robust ethical codes, and an independent oversight for any developing practices or technologies in this area is paramount. Accessibility and potential inequalities also need consideration.
It's a complex ethical landscape. Let's shift to the ultimate physics question, the unified field theory. Could scalar fields be the missing link Erydir suggests?
This is the holy grail of theoretical physics, a single framework explaining all fundamental forces. Erydir proposes that scalar fields might just be it. The current standard model works incredibly well for electromagnetism and the nuclear forces using gauge theories, but gravity, described by general relativity, just doesn't fit neatly. Quantum gravity is the big stumbling block.
And other approaches like string theory haven't yielded testable predictions yet.
Right. So Erydir floats a different idea. What if scalar fields are actually more fundamental than the forces we observe? What if there's a primary scalar field underpinning space-time itself, and all the forces, including gravity, emerge as different properties or excitations of this single field?
That's a radical rethinking. Gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces, all just different ripples or states of one underlying scalar field.
That's the essence of the proposal. It would require a whole new mathematical framework, likely involving nonlinear dynamics and concepts like spontaneous symmetry breaking, where a fundamental symmetry of the underlying field is broken in ways that give rise to the diverse phenomena we see.
Could such a theory explain things like the values of fundamental constants?
That would be a major goal and a sign of success, deriving those constants from the properties of the fundamental scalar field itself, rather than just measuring them. Erydir even hints at possible links between this fundamental field and consciousness. But they're realistic about the immense challenges in developing a mathematically consistent and experimentally testable model.
And specifically bridging that gap between general relativity, gravity as geometry, and quantum mechanics, forces as field excitations. How could scalar fields help there?
That's the core incompatibility physics has struggled with for decades, especially at extreme energies like inside black holes or at the Big Bang. Erydir suggests scalar fields are uniquely positioned to be the bridge, partly due to their relative simplicity and ubiquity, but also their dynamic capacity.
So the idea would be a fundamental scalar field whose energy density variations cause space-time curvature, making gravity emerge from the field dynamics.
Exactly. Gravity wouldn't be fundamental geometry. It would be an emergent property of the scalar field's behavior. And simultaneously, different kinds of excitations or vibrations in that same field could manifest as the particles and forces described by quantum mechanics.
Unifying geometry and quantum fields within one scalar framework.
That's the hope. Again, the mathematical challenges are enormous nonlinear field equations, understanding how symmetries break. But the potential payoff is unifying our description of the universe, possibly explaining mysteries like dark energy and dark matter as aspects of the scalar field, and maybe even connecting physics to consciousness. It's a long shot, but a compelling one.
Wow. Well, Erydir certainly gives us a lot to think about, taking us on quite an intellectual journey. We've gone from the basics of scalar fields.
Their oscillations, resonance, leading to harmonic phase convergence and those geometric patterns.
Then the dynamic scalar breath cycle, with implications from cosmology down to biology.
The really mind-bending ideas about consciousness as a scalar event, the potential influence on evolution, this concept of scalar memory.
How symbols, sound, and our own intention might interact with these fields, the practical uses, and the serious ethical challenges.
And finally, landing on the ultimate quest for a unified field theory, where scalar fields might just play the starring role.
It's an incredibly vast and interconnected web of ideas that Erydir weaves together, drawing from so many different domains and offering a radically different lens for viewing reality.
It really pushes you to think beyond conventional categories and consider the possibility of a much deeper interconnectedness underlying everything we experience.
So a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. Considering this potentially pervasive role of scalar fields suggested by Erydir, how might our fundamental understanding of reality itself have to shift if we truly grasped the kind of interconnectedness implied by these subtle fields and their constant dynamic interplay? What entirely new questions would we start asking about our place in the cosmos and about the very nature of our own conscious experience?
That's definitely something to ponder.
Until our next deep dive.